next question is from Charlotte from Talk Radio. Charlotte.
Thank you. This morning, the Community Secretary talked about the idea that the law allows people to use their good judgment when interpreting how coronavirus guidelines affect them. I was wondering if you could give us a bit of a sense of what this means on a practical basis. So, for example, if one of our listeners gets stopped by the police and the listener believes they are using their good judgment, but the police officer disagrees, whose judgment trumps the other?
Well, thank you, Charlotte. There are exceptional circumstances that are written into the guidelines, and we set out some of the details of these in advance, and some of the examples in the guidelines, and the police themselves have set out a huge degree of detail to make sure that these rules can properly be enforced and policed. From the point of view of the new NHS Test and Trace programme that we're launching today, in the first instance, this will be voluntary. We think that there is a very, very strong instinct from the British people to follow these, so that when the NHS phones you up or contacts you and says, you must isolate, then we're confident that people will. Now, of course, we could also mandate that, but in the first instance, we're not going to.
We want people to feel safe, to tell NHS Test and Trace as soon as they have symptoms, to feel confident and safe in telling NHS Test and Trace who they've been with, so that we can isolate people who might be infectious as fast as possible. And I have great faith in the British public that we all want to be able to get our lives back to normal, and that we are committed to doing that together.
Thanks very much. Professor Van Tan, also.
Yes, I'll just come back in here and remind people that with this virus, the natural R is around about 3. That means left unchecked, one case infects 3 more. So it's going to grow out of control very quickly. The extent to which we can keep control of it very much depends upon the extent to which people across our entire population engage with and cooperate with NHS Test and Trace. And put simply, the more we do so, the greater room for manoeuvre the government will have in terms of making life as normal as possible, whilst still keeping this virus under control.
Thanks very much. I hope that answered the question, Charlotte.
Can I quickly come back? Can I just check? Obviously, it is clear that there are some grey areas here. When there are grey areas, whose authority is it that decides whether something is in keeping with the law?
Well, in those areas where we have made regulations that are mandatory, there is a normal system and process in which the police police those, and then the court system is there ultimately to make decisions. However, in NHS Test and Trace, we're not bringing in a mandatory system, at least in the first instance, because we have the faith in the British people that they will follow what is needed, because it is the right thing to do for themselves, it's the right thing to do for their loved ones and their families, and it's the right thing to do for people's whole communities, because it will make it less likely that wider action will be needed locally, and because it'll make it less likely that there's a local flare-up. So the civic duty and the personal responsibility to follow the instructions of NHS Test and Trace is a very important part of what we're asking people to do following the launch of the service from 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, when the first people will start to get contact from NHS Test and Trace and asked to do something that we recognise is a big ask, which is to self-isolate for 2 weeks. Thanks very much, Charlotte. Next question is Hugo Guy from the Eye.
Thank you, Secretary of State. Is the reason that the tracing app has been delayed from its original launch date because of problems with the trial on the Isle of Wight? And are you confident, both you and Baroness Harding, are you confident that the test and trace scheme will continue to work even if the app never works as originally intended?
The answer to the first question is no, it's not technical problems. It's that one of the things we learnt about in the Isle of Wight is that rolling out the system where people are asked to isolate even if they have no symptoms symptoms starts better when it comes in human form from the contact tracers, and the app is working in the Isle of Wight, and when we have successfully embedded this new principle that I talked about today, that Baroness Harding set out in great detail, this new principle, which is if you are contacted by the NHS Test and Trace programme, even if you have no symptoms, then you need to isolate for up to 14 days. Once that principle is embedded, then that's the time to bring the app to bear, because the app is a complement to this system. Even without it, this system would be successful, but it's a complement because there are some contacts that you don't know that you might have made. For instance, if you're sitting near somebody on a bus, within 2 meters of them, you wouldn't know how to get in contact with that person, but through the app system, we will be able to identify those contacts. So the app is a complement. It is best brought forward once this system is embedded, and that's what we plan to do. It's not because of any technical glitches. Thanks very much. Nadine White from the Huffington Post.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. New data has revealed that Black, Asian and minority ethnic people in England are 54% more likely to be fined under coronavirus rules than white people. If Dominic Cummings were black, it is statistically more likely he would have been stopped by police while out with his family. What is your message to Britain's black communities who worry that fines are not being issued fairly? And I also have a question for Professor Van Tam. We know that Public Health England review into disproportionate brain deaths from COVID-19 is due by the end of this month. Are you able to share any preliminary findings at this time? This is obviously a really pressing issue.
Thanks, Nadine. This is an incredibly important issue, and of course, it's vital that the rules where there is mandation are policed without fear or favour and fairly and equally according to the evidence. And I'll ask Professor Van Tam to respond on the point about the research.
Yes, so thank you for the question. Clearly I'm from an ethnic minority. I regard this as very pressing and very important. I have heard from Public Health England that the report is on schedule per timelines. I believe that the report is going to be very comprehensive when it comes out. It is also going to deal inevitably with enormous complexity, something that I've talked about before now. How you unpick age, gender, underlying comorbidities, crowding, deprivation, all of these things, how you unpick them from the black and minority ethnic signal that is also in the data. And so I'm not going to kind of trail this and give you lots of new findings at this point, because I think that's for Public Health England to do in their own time. But I will say, again, it's pressing. I believe it to be on schedule. It's going to be comprehensive, and it is going to involve quite a bit of complexity and care with how we interpret it and what we take forwards and how.
Thanks very much, Nadine. Final question is from Dan Martin of Leicestershire Live.
Thank you, Ms. Hancock. You mentioned earlier that schools are due to start going back on Monday, but we know here in Leicester and Leicestershire that 2/3 of parents are unhappy about sending their kids back to the timetable the government's pinned to this. Despite the best efforts of councils and head teachers here, there's still clearly an issue of public confidence and a safe return. So what more could and should the government be doing to help parents make what is a very difficult and very difficult decision?
Well, I think this is a really important question, Dan, and right across Leicestershire, I would say to parents of children who are in reception year 1 or year 6, which are the 3 years of primary school that are coming back on Monday, I would say that we wouldn't have made this decision unless there's clear measures been put in place by the Department for Education and by schools to make sure that the schools are safe for children. So I would urge parents to take that very seriously. Of course, many schools have been open throughout with the children of key workers in them as well, and I'm very grateful to all the schools who've stayed open. For instance, so the NHS staff and staff in social care have been able to send their children to school. And there's one further thing that can give people confidence, and I'll ask Baroness Hardick to come in on this, and that is that with the NHS test and trace programme in place, it means that we'll be able to be more targeted in finding those positive cases, in making sure that we find out all of the contacts that they may have infected and passed the disease onto, and therefore use this more targeted approach to be able to control the virus.
So, as the Secretary of State said earlier, we're extending the eligibility for tests to the under fives. That's really important for our early years children and schools. And the way NHS Test and Trace will work is that it will provide an early warning system for local communities to spot that there are maybe a growing number of cases in a school and immediate action can be taken. So it's not just that we will be contacting and identifying and isolating everyone very quickly, we'll also be able to spot if an outbreak is starting. So I think parents across the country can feel really confident that we've got a system that's got their back.
Thanks very much. Dan, thanks very much for your question. Great to have you here in Downing Street. That concludes our daily coronavirus briefing. See you again soon.
It's Nigel Fellowship with you on LBC. An afternoon of meetings and press conferences from 4 o'clock for 90 minutes. Boris Johnson was before Parliament's liaison committee. We then had a delayed, normal daily Downing Street press conference. In the chair was Matt Hancock, and a very interesting political manoeuvre in the last 45 minutes. For the last 48 hours, the government's message has been, we need to move on. But they found it very difficult to move on, as the press and indeed many members of the public are still rowing over Dominic Cummings' trip to the northeast of England. We had expected the NHS test and trace scheme to begin on the 1st of June. This is what Matt Hancock said 45 minutes ago.
If you get symptoms, isolate immediately and get a test. If you are contacted by NHS Test and Trace instructing you to isolate, you must. It is your civic duty. So you avoid unknowingly spreading the virus, and you help to break the chain of transmission. This will be voluntary at first because we trust everyone to do the right thing. But we can quickly make it mandatory if that's what it takes.
And this begins tomorrow. So of the just over 2,000 people that we know tested positive today, from tomorrow there will be a team of NHS tracers who will be getting in touch with those people who tested positive, saying, right, who is it you've spent 15 minutes with that could have spent time within 2 meters of you? And you could then get contacted by the NHS and told, you bet your friend Bill, you now have to isolate for the next 2 weeks. And with that, and with a quite a big easing of the lockdown coming on Monday, I'm asking you tonight, will you obey the rules? Will you keep social distancing? And will you, if you're run by the NHS and told to isolate, will you do so? 0345 6060973. Ben Kentish, LBC's Westminster correspondent. Ben, there's a new name they're all talking about. Boris talks about it a lot, as indeed did Matt Hancock. Tell us who Dido is.
Dido, Nigel, not the 1990s singer, but Dido Hardick.
Yep.
She is the director of NHS Improvements, and she is who Boris Johnson chose to be put in charge and lead the track and trace, or test and trace system, as it's now being called, and pull it all together. That, of course, had to be done in a very short amount of time because it's been a few months since it became clear that that was likely to be the best way out of lockdown and the best way to restore some sort of normality. Problem was the UK had neither the testing or sufficient tracing capacity in place, so they've had to get this up very quickly. There's concerns about what that will mean and create potential teething problems, but it is now ready to go. As you heard, 25,000 tracers duty to your family and your co-workers. It sounded to me like they felt they've got a job on their hands to convince people to do this.
Yes.
Hancock himself said he accepted it was a big ask to ask people who have no symptoms, who feel perfectly healthy, to effectively lock themselves up for 2 weeks because they might have come into, they will have come into contact with a case. This whole system relies on people following the rules, putting faith in each other, putting faith in the government. The concern will be outside government, but I think also increasingly inside in the events of the last few days put that at risk. So no, there was no big announcement as such. We heard from Boris Johnson slightly earlier how the track and trace system would work, but I did think the language civic duty.
It's our responsibility. Yeah, no, I get that, Ben, and of course, if we're not seen to have obeyed, it will become compulsory. Well, earlier on, as I said, Boris Johnson spent 90 minutes before the liaison committee, and one of the interesting questions was asked by Meg Hillier, MP for Hackney South and Shoreditch, and chair of the Public Accounts Committee. She asked Boris this question.
Prime Minister, you said that a number of the allegations that are made about Dominic Cummings were false. You were with him for 6 hours. Did you see the evidence to prove that?
Meg, I don't want to
Yes or no, Prime Minister? It's a simple question. Yes or did you see the evidence?
I don't want to go into much more than I've said.
It's a simple question. Did you see the evidence?
If it pleases you, I would say yes, I did, but I don't want to.
Okay, well, if you said that's fine, I promise you saw the evidence. Would you agree that it would be a good idea for the Cabinet Secretary to see that, or for it to be published, and then this problem might be off your table?
Well, I think actually that it would not be doing my job if I were now to shuffle this problem into the hands of officials who, believe me, Meg, as I think the public would want, working flat out to deal with coronavirus. I think everybody's had I know that there's a great political interest in this. I'm not certain that I understand that could be, and I totally understand public indignation. I totally understand that, but I do think that as I understand things I've said about the whole business, I think it would be much better if we could now move on and focus on the next steps.
Well, on feisty form there, Meg Hillier, and she joins us here on LBC. Meg, were you satisfied with the Prime Minister's answer to your questions?
Well, I think that he's seen the evidence, and I mean, this is something that, remember, that Dominic Cummings raised in that extraordinary press conference the other night, said that he had evidence to prove he'd been where he said he'd been. I think, though, that this is going to keep rumbling on until it's been nailed, and that's part of it. But actually, if that evidence exists, then why not give it to an independent party, or indeed have it published, and then all these allegations that the Prime Minister says, some of which are false, and he'd be critical of the media for doing it, could possibly be either put to bed or we'll know the truth. And I think really, we just got to have it out there. They always say, don't they, Nigel, in politics, that if you do something wrong, that's one thing, but it's the cover-up that gets you. And if we still don't really know the truth of what's been going on, I fear, so the Prime Minister said he's seen it. Well, let's just share it. Open government.
No, fair enough. Please tell me just quickly, this test and trace scheme which is being introduced tomorrow, I mean, this is a really important part, isn't it, of us attempting to get back to some normal life. The government would say, Meg, in good time, all the information about Dominic Cummings will come out. Is now not the time to move on and make test and trace a great success?
Well, look, they're not mutually incompatible. Of course, test and trace is important. I'm proud that my borough of Hackney is going to be one of the pilot areas in London to really get this going, because it needs that local input. That's brilliant that we're getting there. A long way still to go. I think everyone would acknowledge that. But at the heart of number 10, there's this issue that's still there about trust and integrity. And if we don't have that in place, I mean, Nigel, the critical thing in a public health emergency like this is the government with this draconian law, which we all agreed we passed, with certain caveats, but we passed it, to give this government great power. Trust and integrity have to be at the heart. And if that trust is undermined, that's a very serious issue. And we've all, MPs, been contacted by so many constituents, very concerned.
How many constituents have contacted you?
Several hundred so far.
Several hundred.
I have to realize I've been rather busy this afternoon.
You've been
today. I haven't counted them.
Meg, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Meg, she does make the point, and it's an important point, and I want to debate this with you. We are moving on from tomorrow with something that is absolutely fundamental to our well-being and our future. That is the government's test and trace scheme being a success. It needs to be a success. I know there's good reason to be sceptical given some of the previous rollouts on testing, etc., have been very slow, very late. But this really matters. The question is, are you going to obey the rules? Will you maintain social distancing? And will you, if you get a phone call from the NHS, are you prepared to do your civic duty as Matt Hancock asks you and to isolate for 2 weeks? There was one area I thought of real confusion. Robert Peston from ITV asked a question and said that if you're identified as someone who's been with somebody who's just tested positive, and you go, do you go home to your family, let's say, and do they all have to isolate? And the answer was no. You go back to your family, you have to isolate, they don't. And that already has led to a message from Angela, who says on Twitter, let's be clear, if I have to isolate, my partner doesn't, and if I'm infected, then wouldn't the household then have to isolate because my partner may infect people? I suspect, Angela, they rolled this out a bit earlier than they were going to. They've done it because they're trying to move the political agenda on. I suspect they're going to be all sorts of teething problems, and that may well be one of them. Let's go to Barry in Orpington as a new caller. Barry, an afternoon of committee meetings and press conferences. We're about to move to, or the government wants us to move our minds onto the next phase. Are you prepared to obey by the rules that the government gives you?
I don't think I am actually, Nigel. No.
But this is important, Barry. It's a matter of public health.
It's important. I appreciate it's important, but yet again, the government have done what they did last time. They said, this is what we expect you to do, and they put absolutely nothing in place for self-employed. People such as myself.
Yes.
If I go out tomorrow and get a call from the NHS to say, you must go home and self-isolate, I'm going to go home to my wife and my child, and I have to stay off work for 2 weeks. I could go out 15 days' time and get another call saying, you've been in contact, go home for 2 weeks.
What's your line of work, Barry?
I'm a locksmith.
You're a locksmith, so you're in and out of people's houses, basically.
I have been right since the start of lockdown, and I have to, and I've taken all precautions as you'd expect.
Yes.
But, funnily enough, we're one of the few that they haven't classed as a key worker, which by very
ironically, yeah.
But, no, I feel they've jumped the gun. They've come out and said, look, this is what we're going to do, this is what we expect you to do. But what if? What am I supposed to do? I can't afford to stay at home for 2 weeks without doing anything, and then potentially another 2 weeks, and then potentially after that another 2 weeks.
Barry, I can't encourage you to break the government's new rules, of course, but I think you've raised a very important point. Once again, can I say, about the plight of the self-employed who've had the toughest time of any group so far economically in this crisis. Thank you, Barry, very much indeed. Graham from Clacton is another new caller. Good evening, Graham.
Nigel, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right, unlike Barry, my previous caller, who's really worried about this. Now, Graham, are you, and Matt Hancock is talking directly to you, will you do your civic duty in the next phase of this?
Matt Hancock, to me, is talking nonsense, Nigel, because I just don't understand any of it. What's that about? Where, if you're tested, or if you get a phone call from the NHS, and they say you need to isolate, but your family doesn't have to.
I know.
What's the sense in that? Where does it make sense?
I don't know, Graham, I don't know.
The situation right away from day one, none of this makes any sense. To me, it's just a load of nonsense, Nigel, and it's causing so much disruption to this country and the world. And I don't understand it.
Graham, listen. I have been, as you know, very critical from the start of much of the dither and delay and some of the incompetence, and I've not been afraid to voice it here and elsewhere. But I do know that if we get, and I've seen what South Korea did, I've seen what Germany did, I've seen the countries that had testing and tracing organised, their death rates, Graham, are a fraction of ours. Their economies are opening up and moving again, way ahead of us. And I know in my heart that this test and trace scheme really matters. Now, yeah, I doubt the competence of Hancock and others, but I really want this to work, Graham, because it's important for our future. So even if we disrespect the government, even if in the last week, we really scratch our heads about what's been going on, we've got to try and help them succeed, haven't we?
I don't think we've got the right people working it. That's the problem, Nigel. We haven't had the right people in the position of power that we needed from the beginning. Why are they not looking to all these other countries and saying, well, that's worked, let's start doing that?
Yeah,
it's like, we're doing it our own way.
Do you know, Graham, the Germans have been so far ahead of us on almost all of this right from the very start. Graham, I get the passion in your voice. I thank you for your call. What if you are traced and isolated for 14 days, then re-enter society, not having contracted COVID, and then bump into another carrier? Do you then have to isolate for a further 14 days? Should you not be tested as soon as you're asked to isolate? Well, that option wasn't offered at the press conference, but I get the point you're making. Nigel, I think we should just obey the rules. The public don't know what we are dealing with. Well, yeah, Kathy, we don't want this ruined. We do want our easing out of lockdown to be a success. And the Prime Minister has announced that we are moving from next week onto level 3. And that is in line with showrooms being open from Monday. And of course, by June the 15th, all being well, shops, nearly all shops, will be open as well. Not yet pubs or bars or nightclubs. We really do need test and trace to work. We have to hope the government have got this organised, and we have to hope that people will have respect for it. The question is, are we going to behave? Because a lot of people, it seems, in the last week, have lost a bit of respect for this government. Time is now 6:45. Let's get the news headlines with Thomas Wells.
The Health Secretary has confirmed England's coronavirus contact tracing system will be operational from tomorrow. Boris Johnson has rejected suggestions the row surrounding Dominic Cummings has undermined the government's health message. And one of the UK's biggest commercial landlords says more than half of its retail tenants failed to pay rent in March. Tonight, clear and dry in the south, but cloud and drizzle in the northern half of the UK, a low of 8 Celsius.
LBC Travel, I'm J. Louise Knight, and it's still very slow on the northbound M3 this evening between Lightwater